To provide immediate relief, I propose instead to expand the list of basic food items that are exempted from value-added tax. This will include the zero rating of basic food items such as biscuits, cooking oil, canned vegetables, cornflakes, canned fish, canned meat, curry, juice, sausages, ham, ketchup, bottled water, and pigtail.
Now, this decision was meant to make food more affordable, but what if it was also making us sicker? Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel, Spencer's Whole Food Plant-Based Eats and Treats, where we believe that the path to good health is by changing your environment, especially your food environment, for the better. In this video, we continue the series, Government Actions on Health, where we look at how policies from the state impact your health and the health of the entire nation. In today's episode, we're going back in time.
Bring back the old time days. Bring back them old time ways.
We are going back into 2021 when the government of Trinidad and Tobago at the time removed value-added tax or VAT from so-called basic food items.
I now come to basic food items. Madam Speaker, several commentators have suggested that we remove import duties on basic food items to alleviate the problem of rising food prices. However, while it may sound good to those who are unfamiliar with the local and food industry, this would have an immediate and negative impact on the domestic producers of these items. For instance, the removal of import duty on chicken would have a disastrous effect on the local poultry industry. As a result, we are carefully examining the list of the most commonly used basic food items to determine which items can be made exempt from import duty without damaging local manufacturers. An example of a basic food item not made in Trinidad and Tobago, but used as a staple in many households, which falls into this category, is cheddar cheese. However, to provide immediate relief, I propose instead to expand the list of basic food items that are exempted from value-added tax. This will include the zero rating of basic food items such as biscuits, cooking oil, canned vegetables, cornflakes, canned fish, canned meat, curry, juice, sausages, ham, ketchup, bottled water, and pigtail. This measure will take effect from November the 1st, 2021, and an appropriate list of items will be published shortly.
Now, at first glance, that will sound like a good thing, because who doesn't want cheaper food? But what if I told you that many of these items in which VAT was removed from are foods which are highly processed, high in sugar, high in salt, high in fat, and may have been contributing or is still contributing to the chronic disease epidemic that the Trinidad and Tobago population is facing even up to this point. Now let's take a closer look at this. Now remember the list that the former Minister of Finance talked about that will have been made shortly after the budget speech?
This measure will take effect from November the 1st, 2021, and an appropriate list of items will be published shortly.
Well, what I'm about to show you is that very said release that he mentioned. So these are the items that were made VAT-free from since November the 1st, 2021. So as you can see, vegetable or soybean oil, olive oil, coconut oil, canola oil, ghee, peanut butter, black pepper and other spices, family cereals, kids cereals, hot cereal oats, milk substitutes. This will include like soy milk or almond milk and so on. Condensed milk, instant coffee, ground coffee, steel cut oats, black tea, as in like those tea bags that you usually see in the supermarkets. Those are the items that he is talking about. Green tea, orange juice, apple juice, bottled water, seasoned meat, canned sausages, or sausages that are otherwise packed, so therefore like in those packs, those vacuum packs that you usually see them packed in, that will be made VAT-free as well. Canned tuna, canned mackerel, canned peas, canned beans, canned corn, canned mixed vegetables, mayonnaise, ketchup, roti skin, packaged soup, crushed or ground jira, soya chunks, minced soya, ground dal, cheese slices, table butter, pigtail, ham slices, turkey slices, chicken lunch meat, bologna or what is known as bologna, fresh juice, and biscuits and crackers. So, as you can see, there are essentially more like 5 main categories you can see in that list of foods being made VAT-free in November the 1st, 2021. You have the processed meats, you have processed fish, you have canned goods, such as the canned vegetables. You have the oils and the high-fat foods, and also you have the box cereals, such as the family cereals or the kids cereals. Now, one may say this might be a great move to support food affordability. But however, when one takes a deep dive into the nutritional profile of these foods, you can see a pretty different picture emerging, especially when it comes to health and NCDs in context of the population of Trinidad and Tobago. Now let's look at the categories of foods that I had mentioned just a little while ago and take a closer look at each one of them and see how they affect the health of an individual and in turn project that toward the health of the population of Trinidad and Tobago. Let's start with the processed meats, such as the canned meats and sausages and so on.
I'm hungry like a dog, girl. I'm going to be just for food on that table for me.
You mean please?
Yeah, like your flip over the pot. Holy girl, this is a meal fit for a king.
Yes, only the best corned beef for my king.
Corned beef? What corned beef is this, girl?
Rainbow corned beef, darling.
As I had mentioned in my previous video in this series, where I looked at the UNC government's health promises, one of the things which I mentioned in that video was that the World Health Organization classifies processed meats as Group 1 carcinogens. Group 1, according to the IARC, means that there is enough evidence to prove that this agent causes cancer. And the agent in this case is processed meats. It must be noted that processed meats are in the same grouping as tobacco, alcohol, asbestos, and plutonium, just to name a few. Now, a definition of processed meats according to the World Health Organization. Processed meat refers to meat that has been transformed through salting, curing, fermentation, smoking, or other processes to enhance flavor or improve preservation. Now, some examples of processed meat include hot dogs, or what is known as frankfurters, ham, sausages, corned beef, and biltong or beef jerky, as well as canned meat and meat-based preparations and sauces. Now, here's another point to note. The experts concluded that each 50-gram portion of processed meat eaten daily increases the risk of colorectal cancer by 80%. And as I alluded to in my previous video, locally we can see the burden of especially colorectal cancer. That doesn't mean to say that there are other cancers causing problems in the population, but colorectal cancer is a serious problem in Trinidad and Tobago, as can be seen in this article. According to Dr. Maria Clapperton, there were over 43,000 cases of cancer recorded between 2003 and 2020. Now here's the part that I'm talking about. The top 3 leading causes of cancer in men were prostate cancer, colorectal cancer, and lung cancer, while the leading causes in women were breast cancer, uterine cancer, and colorectal cancer. And you will see this in the previous video that I had mentioned. In both men and women, colorectal cancer is a problem. And in that same time period, between 2003 and 2020, there were over 4,000 cases of colorectal cancer in both men and women. So therefore, this given VAT measure may have improved access to foods with proven cancer risk. Next, let's take a look at foods such as oils, table butter, cooking butter, peanut butter, table margarine, ghee, and so on. Now, what is the common thread in these foods, you might ask? These foods are all high-fat foods. Now, at present, we don't have any official data on the average consumption of an average Trinidad and Tobago citizen. However, if one was to go to the website ourworldindata.org, one will see that the daily fat supply per capita in Trinidad and Tobago is just over 100 grams of fat. Now, that is no indication of consumption, because it's very possible that some of that fat that is supplied can be wasted. However, usually when you see an increase in fat availability, in most cases there is an increase in fat consumption, and that has been the case in Trinidad and Tobago. In 1961, the average or the daily fat supply per capita in Trinidad and Tobago was 52.81 grams, according to ourworldindata.org. In 2022, that ballooned to just over 100 grams of fat available per capita in Trinidad and Tobago, which is almost 100% increase in availability of fat in Trinidad and Tobago. Therefore, removing VAT on these items could have provided an incentive to the man on the street to increase consumption of these high-fat items. Now, the question one may ask is, why should I really care about how much fat I consume? I mean, isn't fat one of the things that we are supposed to eat? And I agree, fat is something that, yes, that is supposed to be part of our diet. However, one of the things which we have noticed over time is that there has been an increase in the consumption of fat, and this increase in fat consumption has many effects. A few of the effects I will get into now. One of the well-known effects of a high-fat diet is that it raises your cholesterol, or you are at an increased risk of having high cholesterol. This is something which has been well known for decades. As a matter of fact, in a classic study from Kampala, Uganda, the people who were of African descent in Kampala, they traditionally ate a lower fat diet than the people who were of Asian descent. And one of the things which came out from that study was that the people of African descent, they generally had a lower cholesterol level than the people of Asian descent who consumed a high-fat diet. This is a study here, serum cholesterol diet and coronary heart disease in Africans and Asians in Uganda. Now, as you can see here, the 12-year-old Africans, they had a cholesterol level of 166. The 20-year-olds had a level of 164, and interestingly, the people who were 40, they had a cholesterol level of 145. However, when it came to the Asians who were 12 and 20, they had cholesterol levels of over 200. And when the age increased to 40, the cholesterol numbers got worse. So therefore, you can see that there is quite a disparity in the cholesterol levels of the Africans in Kampala, Uganda versus the Asians in Kampala, Uganda, even though they come from pretty much the same environment in terms of geography and so on. Might I add, it may be the same environment in terms of geography, but their food environments are very, very different. Now, to drive the point home, here is a listing of some of the foods that Africans in Uganda in the 1950s, what they used to eat. Foods such as green plantain, sweet potatoes, cassava, yams, corn, millet, and you have pumpkins, tomatoes, and green leafy vegetables. Now one may ask, how did they get their protein? As you can see, the adequacy of protein in the diet depends almost entirely on the extent to which pulses, that is really like peas and beans, legumes, groundnuts, and cereals, or what we will call whole grains. Most meals are served with a sauce made of groundnuts, beans, and a mixture of vegetables, and occasionally meat or fish. As in like meat or fish was served like very, very rarely. How rarely, you might ask? If you were the more well-to-do African in Uganda, meat was eaten only once or twice a week, and if you were of the poorer classes, you only had meat like once a month. So the typical African in Uganda used to consume between 16 to 20 grams of fat. That is, if you were of the poorer class, and if you were more of the middle upper class, the amount of fat consumed by an African would have been close to 40 grams. So therefore we're talking about like very, very low fat. We're talking about between 7 and 18% of the calories coming from fat. However, with regards to the Asians in Uganda, fats and oils were always used in the preparation of foods, with cottonseed oil and ghee being the main sources of fat in the Asian in Uganda diet. Here is a simple listing of some of the fatty foods that an Asian resident in Uganda used to eat on a weekly basis. You had 1 pound of cottonseed oil, a half to a 3/4 pound of ghee, a 1/4 pound of butter, 6 to 8 pints of milk, and 1 ounce of cheese. And the text after that says that it is evident that fats and oils provide a large portion of the total caloric intake. Well, no crap, Sherlock. I mean, just from that listing alone, one could estimate that an average Asian resident in Uganda ate between 125 to 145 grams of fat a day. That's a lot of fat. And why is this such a big concern? Well, take a look at this. In the African population in Uganda, coronary heart disease is almost non-existent. And they was able to prove this by actually looking at autopsies. As in, you actually cut open the cadaver and look at the arteries. They found no evidence, or very, very little evidence, of heart disease. On the other hand, the Asian community, coronary heart disease was a major problem. And why am I drawing reference to this? Now, it is worth noting that the paper said that the Asian residents in Uganda had a bigger problem with heart disease than the African residents in Uganda. Now, when you parallel that with Trinidad and Tobago, heart disease is the #1 killer in Trinidad and Tobago. And when you look at the diet of the Asians and you compare it with the diet of an average Trinidad and Tobago citizen, you can see a lot of parallels, especially when it comes to fat consumption, as in the foods that typical people in Trinidad and Tobago eat, and you compare it with an Asian resident in Uganda, you can see a lot of parallels coming to the fore. Now, take a look at the average fatty foods that an Asian resident in Uganda in the 1950s used to consume. And then now, check and see what are the foods which were made VAT-free by the government in November 2021 and beyond. You have vegetable or soybean oil, olive oil, coconut oil, canola oil, ghee, peanut butter, cheese slices, peanut butter, and not to forget pigtail, ham slices, turkey slices, chicken lunch meat, and bologna. All of these are high-fat foods, but we put these high-fat foods as basic food items, make them more accessible to the population, and then we wonder why heart disease is a problem and it's getting worse in Trinidad and Tobago. Oh, you don't believe me that it's getting worse? Well, take a look at this. This was an ad from the Maritime Financial Group on social media. In this ad, they gave the information that the youngest heart attack claimant in 2024 was 34 years old. So therefore, a disease which usually would have been reserved for older folks, as in people in their late 50s, 60s, 70s, and now started to affect people as young as in their 30s.
Things being common, when we have a lot of risk factors in patients, particularly in Trinidad and Tobago, we have a lot of patients that present to hospital at even younger and younger ages, where the arteries or the piping of the heart is blocked off, or it's becoming narrowed over time.
All right, Doc, let's talk about that. Since we recognize that the arteries are so critical to the health of the heart, what are some of the things that cause that blockage of the arteries? And as yesterday you and I were speaking, you told me that you're really concerned because a lot of younger people are presenting with heart issues.
Yes, and I think it's very important to recognize in our country, we underestimate how young people are presenting with heart problems. And it's as young as 30 years old, people presenting with massive heart attacks.
I personally know of 2 individuals, men, who died of heart attacks in their late 30s. So high cholesterol isn't just a numbers academic exercise. It is a matter of life and death. Also, fat, especially dietary fat, it is the most calorie-dense macronutrient that there is. So therefore, the more fat you consume, the more calories that you input into your body, and the higher the chance of that dietary fat being converted into body fat. Now, I hope this piece of text from the scientific paper called Dietary Fat and Obesity can maybe help to explain and drive the point home that what really causes people to gain weight is not really so much of the carbohydrate, but it's more of the dietary fat. So it simply costs less to store fat in the body from dietary fat than from carbohydrate. Get that point home. It is much easier to store body fat using dietary fat than it is for carbohydrate. Why is that? Dietary fat can be entered into the triglyceride fat stores of the body at a metabolic cost of 3% of ingested calories. So therefore, 100 calories from dietary fat, 97% of those calories can be converted into body fat. While the cost of storing dietary carbohydrate in fat requires the expenditure of 23% of the initial calories. So what that means is that if you ingest 100 calories of carbohydrate, at the most, 77% of those calories goes into body fat. One of the things also you have to remember is that when you eat carbohydrates, the carbohydrates get stored in the liver and the muscle as glycogen. Now, there are limited stores of that. However, for dietary fat usually gets stored in the adipose tissue in the body, and it does that much more efficiently than carbohydrate. Also of note is that carbohydrate is the body's preferred source of energy. So what gets used up for energy purposes in the body? Carbohydrate. Now this, given the fact that dietary fat is the most calorie dense macronutrient that there is, this contributes to overconsumption, and this leads to obesity and its many complications. Now, some of these complications include non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, increased risk of at least 13 different types of cancers. And you have hormonal, reproductive, and respiratory disorders, such as polycystic ovary syndrome, you have sleep apnea, and you can have various fertility challenges because of obesity. Now here's Dr. Brown talking about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and how obesity contributes to such a condition.
Many people have liver damage and they don't even know it. It's Dr. Brown, and if you have fatigue, belly fat, and abdominal discomfort, you could have a fatty liver. So what is fatty liver disease? Fatty liver is as it sounds. It's accumulation of fat such as triglycerides and other fats within the liver. Now there are two kinds, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and alcoholic fatty liver disease. The name alcoholic fatty liver disease is self-explanatory. If you drink a lot of alcohol, you're going to accumulate a lot of fat in the liver. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease has different causes. Usually it's caused by metabolic conditions such as diabetes, high cholesterol, and being obese or overweight. Starvation diets can also lead to fatty liver disease. So undereating actually can result in a fatty liver. Fatty liver leads to inflammation of the liver cells or damage to the liver cells. When this happens for a prolonged period of time, it can lead to scarring of the liver or lead to liver cirrhosis. Cirrhosis eventually leads to liver failure. And liver failure eventually leads to liver cirrhosis can also lead to liver cancer, and it can also lead to cardiovascular disease and diabetes. And if you know me as a doctor, you know I like to prevent. Lifestyle changes, including weight loss, can also help reverse the changes of fatty liver. And if you drink too much alcohol, you have to stop drinking alcohol. Cut out those deep fried foods and cut back on all those refined sugars, or cut it out. Your body is a self-regulating machine. Your liver is capable of healing itself once we don't get to the point of scarring or cirrhosis.
Now, one video which has gotten quite a bit of views, as a matter of fact, it is one of my most viewed videos on TikTok. It is talking about the calorie density of common Trinidad and Tobago foods. Now, one of the things which I want to highlight, especially with a lot of those foods that I listed, is that a lot of those foods tend to have quite substantial amount of fats in them. So that's what makes them calorie dense. They are either fried in oil or oil is used in the preparation of these dishes. So increasing waistline size is a growing problem in Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm not saying this tongue in cheek. This is because the data reflects the reality. In 2011, the mean BMI of the population was 26.5, which is classified as overweight. However, in 2024, the BMI or the mean BMI of the population increased from 26.5 to 27.8. So what that means is that we are getting heavier and most likely we are getting larger. So in other words, we are becoming more overweight and we are on our way to becoming pretty much obese in the population. The amount of people in the population who would determine to be either overweight or obese, which is a BMI of more than 25, the percentage was 55% in 2011. That percentage increased to 61.2 in 2024. And the percentage of the population which were classified as obese, which, and now I don't have it on the slide here, but obese, if your BMI is more than 30, you are classified as obese. The people whose BMI was more than 30 in 2011 was 25.7%. That percentage increased to 31.6% in 2024. So in other words, we're getting fat.
We are not getting fat. You're already fat.
Well, I stand corrected. Now remember the canned meats that I talked about earlier? Now cancer isn't the only problem when it comes to canned and processed meats. These canned and processed meats are often loaded with sodium. The same goes for the processed fish, the canned vegetables, and some of the high-fat foods such as the butter and cheese. For example, a can of Brunswick chicken Vienna sausages. Here's the nutrition facts of Brunswick chicken Vienna sausages. just 4 sausages has over 400 milligrams of sodium in them. And oh, by the way, check the fat too. The total fat is 15 grams. So therefore, if you look to eat 8 sausages of that, which will amount to 2 servings, that will amount to 30 grams of fat that you're consuming. And that's just from the Vienna sausages alone. Yes, a very popular canned meat in Trinidad and Tobago, corned beef. Look how much sodium there is in 1 serving of corned beef. And 1 serving of corned beef, which is just 1 ounce, which isn't much. 1 serving has over 300 milligrams of sodium. And usually with most people tend to associate a serving of meat will tend to be like around 4 ounces or even more. So 4 ounces of corned beef, you're looking at around 1200 milligrams of sodium, and that's just from the corned beef. We haven't included bread or any other ingredients for the meal that you are consuming with that corned beef. Now, in canned tuna, what you have over 300 milligrams of sodium in 1 tin of tuna. Now, mackerel is another popular canned fish. Here's how much sodium there is in 1 serving of mackerel. 1 serving has almost 350 milligrams of sodium, which is just around 65 grams. So we could be talking about double that, can be 4 ounces. So therefore you could be looking at around 700 milligrams of sodium in roughly around 4 ounces of canned mackerel. So I hope now you are seeing how much the sodium adds up. Ah yes, saltfish. They say it's sweeter than meat, yes?
Saltfish, it's sweeter than meat.
Well, just take 2 pieces of saltfish and look how much sodium there is in 2 pieces of saltfish. Over 14,000 milligrams of sodium. So therefore you're going to have to do a whole lot of washing and a whole lot of boiling to get anywhere close to a reasonable amount of sodium in that saltfish.
All saltfish.
Now, canned beans. How much sodium there is in this tin of canned beans? There is over 360 milligrams of sodium in 1 serving of baked beans. And as you can see on the nutrition facts label, there are 3 servings in this tin of baked beans. So if you were to empty out the whole tin, you'll be getting over 1,000 milligrams of sodium in just that 1 tin of baked beans. And 1 ounce of cheddar cheese will tend to have just under 200 milligrams of sodium in it. So one can only guess how much sodium there is in the processed cheese slices. Now, how much sodium there is in table butter? 1 tablespoon can have just under 100 milligrams of sodium in it. So you could be using almost 200 milligrams of sodium of butter in a single sandwich. And if you think the breads and the cereals were safe, check out this pack of hops bread. 1 hops bread can have over 200 milligrams of sodium in it. 2 sandwiches, 400 milligrams of sodium just from the bread. And even in this snack size pack of granola, you're getting over 300 milligrams of sodium in that snack size pack. It is generally accepted that excess sodium damages blood vessels and in turn damages organs in the body such as the kidneys, brain, and so on. I say generally because there are some of us out there who likes to push boundaries. Here's Dr. Brown again talking about how high blood pressure can cause damage to your main blood vessel.
You know high blood pressure can tear your major arteries, and not just any artery, your aorta, your main artery. It's Dr. Brown and we're going to talk about one of the most fatal complications of high blood pressure, aortic dissection. Your aorta is the largest artery in your body. It's not only your largest artery, it's the artery that supplies all the other arteries, and therefore it's the artery that supplies all of your major organs, all of them. People who suffer for prolonged high blood pressure are at risk of tearing this artery. The tear happens in the lining of the arteries. This tear is known as aortic dissection, and over time, high blood pressure could cause worsening of this tear. Over time, blood can accumulate within this tear. When blood accumulates there, it can reduce blood flow to some of your most major organs, including your kidneys and intestines. If the tear gets worse enough, it can lead to rupture, causing excessive bleeding because it's your major artery, and eventually...
It must be constantly reminded that the American Heart Association, they recommend no more than 1500 milligrams of sodium for the day. But as you can see, a lot of these basic food items that were made VAT-free by the government in 2021, you can see that you don't have to consume much of these foods in order to go over that limit set by the American Heart Association. Now, it's true that the World Health Organization, they have set a limit of 2000 milligrams a day, and the US Dietary Guidelines have set a recommendation limit of 2300 milligrams a day for people ages 13 and above. But why is the American Heart Association so effective? This will tell you why.
Whereas if we don't cut down, a chronic high salt intake can lead to a gradual increase in blood pressure throughout life, as shown in the famous InterSalt study. 52 centers from 32 countries participated with hundreds of participants each, and 4 of those centers were in populations that ate so little salt they actually complied with the American Heart Association guidelines for salt reduction. Something less than 1% of Americans achieve. In a population where everyone makes the cutoff, not a single case of high blood pressure was found, not one case of high blood pressure. But not only that, the older folks had the same blood pressure as the teenagers. This is why including such populations is so important. If you just look at the 48 centers in the industrialized Western world, there does not appear to be any relationship between rising blood pressure with age and how much sodium people are getting every day, right? It just looks like a random assortment of dots. Now, the salt industry looks at this and says, aha! See, I told you so. No relationship between salt and increasing blood pressures as you get older. But maybe that's because they're all getting too much salt. The American Heart Association recommendation is that everyone get their salt intakes under here. So they're all way over. You can imagine a similar result if this was instead lung cancer rates versus packs of cigarettes smoked every year. Whether you smoked 150 packs a year or 200 packs a year, it might not make much of a difference. To see a relationship between smoking and cancer, you'd have to compare smokers to those who rarely light up. And indeed, if you add in those low-salt populations that get little or no high blood pressure as they get older, and you end up with a highly statistically significant relationship between increasing sodium and increasing blood pressure. But only if you include people that actually comply with the SALT guidelines. As with so many lifestyle interventions, they only work if you actually do it.
Now, one more thing to note about that InterSalt study. One of those 48 countries in which the level of consumption of sodium was above the American Heart Association limit was Trinidad and Tobago. As a matter of fact, in the 200-person cohort from Trinidad and Tobago, there was an 18% incidence of hypertension in just 200 people from a little village called Plymouth in Tobago. And yet, with the removal of VAT from these so-called basic food items, we could have potentially unleashed more sodium in the population, potentially increasing the incidence of hypertension in Trinidad and Tobago and the complications thereof, such as heart disease, kidney disease, and stroke. Now let's talk about another chronic disease that is plaguing Trinidad and Tobago and its population. Now, diabetes, or what is known as diabetes mellitus, affects over 15% of the adult population in Trinidad and Tobago. And as mentioned in the previous video, diabetes is the second leading cause of death in Trinidad and Tobago, accounting for 17% of all-cause mortality. However, it must be known that mortality isn't the only problem related to diabetes.
In Trinidad, we lose about 500 limbs per year. That's more than one per day, and I'm talking about major amputations above or below the knee. About 15 to 20% of these die in hospital, and then another 25% would die within a year. So it is both a limb-threatening and a life-threatening disease. Imagine 40% of these patients would be dead in a year. This is what it looks like, an above knee and a below knee amputation.
And as one could well imagine, these limb amputations result in reduced quality of life for the unfortunate patients. Now, most people tend to associate diabetes, especially type 2 diabetes, with excess sugar and excess carbohydrate intake.
The whole of Barbados is addicted to sugar. And it's the biggest killer in this country. 1 in 5 Barbadians is diabetic, type 2, and 50% of the cases at the QEH.
However, what scientific evidence indicates is that excess dietary fat plays a more critical role in the path or in the lead up towards type 2 diabetes. This is because high-fat diets impair insulin sensitivity and the uptake of glucose into the cells.
And lastly, Chuck, if you don't mind, I just want to take 1 minute, 2 minutes, and just walk you through how it is that this diet works for diabetes, okay? This is a muscle cell, this purple oval. And as I mentioned earlier, it's powered by sugar, glucose. That's its fuel. But the problem is glucose cannot get from the blood into a muscle cell. It bounces right off. The cell membrane rejects it. There are little entrances, but they are closed until you have the key. And the key is insulin. The insulin key arrives and attaches to a receptor, just like a key in a lock, and it opens that channel. The insulin opens that channel, and now the glucose comes right inside. Great, and it's working super, okay? Insulin is the key. So what goes wrong is that for breakfast you had bacon and eggs, and for lunch we had a chicken salad sandwich. And if all of these fatty foods are front and center in my plate, I'm getting a lot of fat in my foods, a lot of fat in my diet. What happens? The fat builds up inside the cell. And as the fat builds up inside the cell, the insulin key does nothing. It can't work. This is what we call insulin resistance. So the insulin still attaches to the cell, nothing happens. So the glucose molecules don't come in, your blood sugar goes up, doctors say you got diabetes. What do? What I do is I get the animal products off my plate. There is now no animal fat in your diet. You keep the oils low too, and that fat inside the cell goes away. Now then the insulin can work again because the fat's gone, and now the glucose can get into the cell, and everybody is happy.
I will go more into depth in this in a future video, so take note of that. However, just let it be known that excess dietary fat consumption can be a very critical factor in the development of type 2 diabetes to where it is today in Trinidad and Tobago. In a 2023 Trinidad Express article, it was mentioned that chronic kidney disease was the 4th leading cause of death in Trinidad and Tobago, according to the Ministry of Health. Now, chronic kidney disease is driven by the 3 chronic conditions that I had mentioned earlier, all of which are driven by poor diet availability in Trinidad and Tobago. These conditions are hypertension, diabetes, and obesity. And given the removal of VAT from these so-called basic food items, one can only expect that the chronic kidney disease epidemic will continue to get worse. Now, it is my belief that all of this ill health that we are experiencing as a nation can be greatly reduced if we change the foods that are available and accessible to us. However, it is my belief that the actions of the previous government, especially on this front, has made it more difficult for us to get anywhere in the positive direction. Now, I'm not saying that this measure taken by the previous government wasn't well-intentioned. The cost of living, especially when it comes to food, is very high, especially for the income levels for the majority of the population. However, it is still my belief that this measure taken by the previous government has severe unintended consequences. Now, what is a good starting point is that dried legumes and fresh produce is already VAT-free. That is a great starting point because dried legumes and fresh produce are two foods that will help in combating the chronic disease epidemic and improving the health of the population. However, I believe that more needs to be done to improve especially the accessibility of these foods such as dried legumes, whole grains, and fresh produce to the population so that the health of the population can be improved and in short order. Now, if one is looking for a long-term solution to addressing the accessibility and affordability of healthy foods in Trinidad and Tobago, we're going to have to take a good hard look at how we do agriculture in Trinidad and Tobago with the intention of doing a pretty much close to complete overhaul how agricultural processes and systems are done in Trinidad and Tobago. However, I believe that one quick short-term solution that we in Trinidad and Tobago can implement is by making imported healthy food more affordable and more accessible to the population, kind of like what Barbados did.
In addition to the above items, sir, we will remove the import duties and VAT, sir, on pears, not avocado, sir, pears, ortanics, mandarins, grapefruits, and plums, sir.
But what did we in Trinidad and Tobago do?
Madam Speaker, we are restoring the VAT base to its original conceptualization. It will now be broadened to include luxury imported foods. The full VAT of 12.5% will now be applied to a wide range of imported luxury food items, such as lobster, escargot, clams, strawberries, champagne, apples, grapes. The full list will be published in due course and will take effect on January the 1st, 2021. Believe it or not, Madam Speaker, all of these things are now exempt from VAT.
So Barbados made imported fruit cheaper, while we in Trinidad and Tobago made imported fruit more expensive, under the guise of luxury food items. But these basic food items, which are high in salt, high in fat, and potentially contributing to hypertension, diabetes, obesity, and cancer, these are the ones which the previous government made more accessible and cheaper for the population. Make it make sense.
What are you doing?
Now, there are those of you out there who will say that removing VAT from these luxury food items, apples, grapes, strawberries, and so on, this will drive the import bill even higher because this can potentially increase the demand of these items, apples, grapes, and strawberries, and so on. But guess what? I think that's a good thing because one of the things that Dr. Clapperton and the former Minister of Health, Mr. Terence Yalcin, they expressed concern about the lack of consumption of fruits and vegetables by the population.
With respect to dietary practices, we looked at the percentage of persons who consumed the required 5 servings of fruits and vegetables per day. We found that 93.3% of the population consumed less than 5 servings of fruit and vegetables per day.
And this to me is another frightening statistic. Prevalence of those not eating
less than 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, 91%. Let's just focus on that. 91% of the population of 1.4 million is not eating enough fresh fruits and vegetables.
Now, going back to the food import bill. The food import bill in 2022 was 7.3 billion. In 2023, it was 7.2 billion. But do you know what is comparable in amount to the food import bill? The 2025 budgetary allocation to the health sector was 7.571 billion TT dollars, which is even more than the food import bill. Now, just to give you an idea of the costs involved in healthcare, according to the budgetary speech for 2025, 3,400 patients receive dialysis services at a cost of 380 million. 2,000 beneficiaries receive radiation treatment, which is a treatment for cancer, and 4,000 citizens receive cardiac services at the cost of 15 million, and you had 3,000 vitreoretinal surgeries, so therefore those are like eye surgeries. Now, all this was done under the external patient care program, which is these services are not done in the hospital setting, the public hospital setting, but what is done is that there is an arrangement between the government and a private hospital or a private medical institution, and the services are done at the private institution while the government bears the cost. The budget statement also mentioned that at the regional health authorities, so therefore these are in the public hospitals, over 13,000 people receive dialysis and over 7,000 cataract surgeries were performed, and 135,000 diagnostic eye examinations were conducted for persons who had trouble with their eyes. The cost here is not recorded, but you can be rest assured that every single piece of equipment, device, and so on has to be paid for somewhere, and that is through the taxpayers' dollar. Here's another piece of financial information. Over 265,000 people benefited from the CDAP program, which is the Chronic Disease Assistance Program, at a cost of 190 million over the course of 2021 to 2024, so over the course of 3 years. But here's also the next thing, that there wasn't a figure attached to it, but hundreds of millions more were spent on the treatment of diabetes, hypertension, and cancer. And with this government measure, we could be looking at spending hundreds of millions of dollars more. Now then, you have ambulance services provided at the cost of 540 million, and then you had the enhancement of the lung cancer clinic at the cost of 27 million. Now, given the health care costs that I had just outlined for you, here what the former Minister of Health had to say about the health budget in 2019, which is just 6 years ago from the time of recording this.
Madam Speaker, NCDs is one of the most critical elements facing this country. And our health budget went up from 3.08 billion in 2008 to 6.0 billion in 2019. That is unsustainable. We have to tackle NCDs.
But yet, here we are in 2025 with a health budget allocation of over $1.5 million more than how it was for the 2020 budget. And I don't know how that can in any shape or form be sustainable. And one of the most frustrating things about it is that there are tangible ways to address it, simple ways, but ways which will require heavy input from the government in order to bring about systemic change, meaningful change, long-lasting change, so that we are not throwing money behind a problem that is just getting worse and worse as time goes by. So now I hope that I have made clear to you how government decisions and government policy measures impact your health. Like specifically this one where the government removed VAT on ultra-processed foods, foods which potentially contribute to hypertension, diabetes, obesity, and cancer, how these policy measures, they impact your quality of life and they impact the national purse. Now, one can only hope that this newly installed government can take the lessons from the previous government to heart, even specifically the one where they remove VAT from ultra-processed foods, and see what can be the fallout from it. Understand that the decisions that they take today can have an impact on the population's health, and the population's vitality. One can only hope that they take the lessons to heart and take the necessary steps to move the health of the population in the right direction. Dr. Bodo, I hope now you understand your mandate in improving the health of the population and that they take the necessary steps to do so. And if the goodly minister doesn't do that, Trinidad and Tobago, it is incumbent upon you to hold the minister and by extension hold the government accountable. Now, I touched on alcohol earlier on in this video. Now, are you aware that alcohol greatly increases your risk for various types of cancer? But what was the previous government's position on regulating consumption of this addictive substance?
Given the findings that are linked between alcohol consumption and non-communicable diseases, is the ministry considering restrictions on advertising sale of alcohol beverages?
So that will have to be a policy position. Restricting the advertising of alcohol is not something that the Ministry of Health is considering right now as a policy position. What we have always advised people to do is to make the wise choices.
In the next video, I will look at the previous government's actions and policy measures taken on alcohol and show you what their position and actions on alcohol, how it affects you, even if you don't drink alcohol yourself. Now, if you found this video helpful, press the like button and share it with a friend. Feel free to leave a comment below. Feel free to indicate what policy measure do you think has hurt the health of the Trinidad and Tobago population the most. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives in this government actions and health video series. If you made it this far, I thank you for watching and I'll see you soon.